Ever be in a room with a bunch of people and they're all talking about something that they all really love and you think it's just okay, but yet you agree with their enthusiasm just so you don't get your ass beat? Well, now you know how I feel.
Shadow of the Colossus is one of those games where it had the Minecraft effect on me way before Minecraft existed. It was a game that a lot of people liked. They said it was epic, a work of art, one of the most influential games ever made, and when everyone started the circle jerk, I snuck away as everyone was undoing their pants and put the game disc in my PS2 before they could use it for their next round of Ookie Cookie, or Soggy Biscuit if you're in the UK. If Shadow of the Colossus was made today, hipsters would be saying that they were playing it before it was mainstream. Although with the way Sony marketed it, you could say that it was more mainstream than the Panama Canal.
So on my 21st birthday, I boarded the hype train expecting it to take me to the land of milk and honey, only to get off at the first stop and trade my ticket for booze.
A circle jerk is all well and good, but when someone comes in thinking it might be fun to join in, but you turn around and climax in their eye, then you pretty much ruin the experience for them before they even got a chance to undo their pants. This was the first game more hype dashed the experience for me. After I killed the first Colossus, which took me less than a few minutes, I asked a friend of mine at the time, "That's all? I do this 15 more times?" Needless to say, I was not impressed at the time and never touched it again after that, but eventually I got the urge to give it a second chance. However, I had no method of playing it. Then it was re-released on the PS3 with Ico in an HD collection, and it wasn't until a few weeks ago is when I picked that up.
It happens. You don't like something the first time, but then the second time you love it. I didn't like 300 or Shaun of the Dead the first time I saw them, but I saw them a second time and I said, hey, I really love these movies, so maybe that will happen with this game.
Shadow of the Colossus was developed by Team Ico, the same developers of Ico, and the stuck in development hell, The Last Guardian, a game that will more than likely be a launch title for the PS5 at the rate it's going. Going by the codename Naiko, a portmanteau of Next Ico, the game director, Fumito Yuta, and producer, Kenji Kaito, held their development teams to higher standards. Out of 500 artists that applied to work on Shadow of the Colossus, only 1 or 2 of them met the standards they were looking for. They wanted to make everything look realistic in how things react, like how Wander tumbles about when the Colossus moves. They worked on making the physics as real as they could. The bigger the Colossus, the slower it moves, and the smaller it is, the faster it is. They wanted players and developers to change how they perceive bosses. That's why the only enemies in the game are the 16 Colossi.
There's a game for the Genesis called Alien Soldier where all you do is go from giant boss to giant boss, and that's pretty much what this game is. It's a boss rush.
The entire premise of the game is to defeat the 16 Colossi, which look really good visually. They look organic, but at the same time have pieces of rock and building pieces in them. It's like they were made from the landscape, or didn't move for so long they actually became part of it. For the time, the graphics are pretty good. It's got that Jak and Daxter feel where there's no load times and you can go anywhere you want. When it comes to the HD port though, I think it could have been handled better. I've played the HD Sly and Ratchet collections and the Kingdom Hearts 1.5 HD remix, and with those you really only notice some texture pixelation, but everything was smoothed out and the game took the entire screen area. In Shadow of the Colossus HD, however, it looks like they just made the PS2 version in widescreen, carelessly ejaculated some low-grade polish onto it and called it a day. This is one of those times where the company porting it did a lazy job, and you can blame Blue Point Games for that. They also did a God of War HD collection, a Metal Gear Solid HD collection port, and considering their less than stellar job with this port, I question the quality of those, but eventually I do plan on getting them.
But from what I heard, they did a really good job porting Titanfall to the Xbox 360, so who knows, maybe they were just Xbox fanboys that did a lot of porting of Sony titles.
The music is pretty good. Each Colossus has its own music, but when you grab on and start climbing, it changes to this one song that doesn't really change if at all, which I find depressing because when you start the battle, the music is really cool and heart-pounding, but when you start climbing the Colossus, it changes to this heroic you're gonna win music, essentially eliminating any sense of danger and action. Like the 6th Colossus, the music for it makes you sound like you're gonna lose no matter what you do, but the second you grab onto that beard, it changes to this heroic climbing music and all of a sudden I no longer cared as that music took me out of the battle. Shadow of the Colossus is considered to be a puzzle game because you need to figure out how to kill the Colossi. However, I see it more as a platform game with more emphasis on climbing than platforming.
I really don't want to call this a puzzle game because the solution to defeating the Colossi is find a glowy part, attack a glowy part. That's not really puzzle solving, I think that's more exploration.
Each Colossus has at least one spot marked by a symbol where you need to attack, and in addition there may be possible weak spots that you need to attack in order to get to the main symbols. On average there's 2 symbols that you need to attack to kill the Colossi. Some Colossi attack on sight, others you can sneak up on without being noticed, and some don't even care if you're there until you attack them. All you need to do is either get their attention or sneak up and climb them, possibly attack a weak spot and then find the symbol and stab it until it's dead. One really neat thing is that this game sports a grip meter, and it depletes the longer you hold down the button, and eventually you'll lose grip and fall. This is actually a pretty innovative feature. In most games you can hold on to something forever. Think if Tomb Raider or Uncharted had a grip meter. You'd never be able to beat them because there's extensive climbing sections with no brakes.
Imagine the map to Shambhala Room in Uncharted 2. Drake would never get to the top of that giant dagger if he could lose his grip. He'd probably get close, but then he would drop like a rock.
Speaking of falling from the top of a Colossus doesn't do much damage, only taking off a small portion of your health. The only fall that actually caused death was one that I tested, and that was in the temple where I jumped into the small pool from the top. Speaking of death, I found this game to be extremely easy. The only Colossus that killed me was the 10th one, only because it bumped into me, which took about 7/8 of my health bar, which I found weird as the 8th Colossus flipped itself over and landed on top of me, which I would think would be more damaging. But hey, video game logic. Some aspects of climbing I noticed are flawed on a technical aspect. I've had times where Wander would just dangle without moving, or if I needed to jump to the ledge above the one I was hanging from, he would just jiggle. I later found out that if I was holding the analog stick up, but ever so slightly to the left or right, and I don't mean that I was holding it up left or up right, I was holding it up with hardly a micron to the left or right, but this is fixed by not holding the analog stick when needing to jump.
Edge Magazine said in their review of the game that the controls were clumsy, crude, and unpredictable. I think that they're slightly clumsy, the layout's just a little bit crude, but not unpredictable.
The controls can be a little clumsy at times due to wanting to be overly precise, like in the example I gave when climbing and jumping up to the next platform above you, or trying to climb around a ledge and Wander tries but flails against a ledge instead, or trying to jump onto your horse, which results in jumping around unless you're in the perfect spot. You can tell they wanted precision, which is all well and good, but there is a line between being too accurate that you cross into being clumsy. Another example is unless you're in the perfect spot on the Colossus when you attack the symbol, Wander may just slip constantly until you reposition yourself, even if the spot you were in seemed like a good one. Control layout is weird, although the only thing I found weird was the triangle being jump and X calls your horse. Luckily you can change that in the control options. Of all the platform games that have been on the PlayStation 2, X has always been jump, but that's my only nitpick about the layout because it's just plain weird to do. And the camera controls version of normal are actually inverted, and to get them to normal you need to invert them.
Which brings me to the camera, which is good for what they wanted to do and show, but it's not really that good for gameplay purposes.
What I mean by this is that the camera will always try to give these big dramatic shots, so this way they can show more and make the game look like a movie. It will move around and give you the most perfect angles to show as much scenery or action as it can. While the camera works good for film, it can be more of a battle to keep the camera where you want it, like running away from a Colossus to give yourself some room. So that way you could plan how you want to attack, but the camera turns around to show the Colossus as you run from it. In a movie, that would be a good shot. In a game, you can't see where you're going. But I really don't want to criticize the camera because you can tell they wanted to give the game that epic Lord of the Rings feeling, which it does a really good job with. But for gameplay purposes, it doesn't work out that well, because there were times where it worked out really well and gave me this feeling of playing an epic fantasy movie, but then there were times I had to wrestle with the camera to get it where I needed it.
I would say about 95% of the time the camera was alright, but that other 5% was a battle worthy of a Colossus.
Some people have complained about the horse's AI. Yeah, it can be a bit irritating at times, but it acts and controls like a real horse. But that's an assumption, as I've never ridden a horse. The story is pretty vague, and there really isn't much to spoil, as some of it's left to your interpretation, but if you're afraid of spoilers, skip to this part in the video. The game starts with Wander bringing a dead girl named Mono to a place called the Forbidden Land. Already, a bad idea. A forbidden land is forbidden for a reason. Wander says that Wano's had a cursed destiny and therefore was sacrificed because of it. Dorman, a disembodied voice that says he can revive Mono if Wander kills the 16 Colossi, although Wander may have to pay a huge price. Wander does so, and it's revealed that they are being pursued by a group led by someone called Iman. And after defeating the last Colossus, the group catches up to Wander, kill him, and Dorman takes possession of Wander's body, making it into a massive giant. Iman takes Wander's sword, throws it into a pool of water which sucks up the Dorman-possessed Wander, and the group flees as the bridge to the temple collapses. Mono wakes up, follows the horse to a pool, finds a male baby with horns, and leads to a shrine with a garden, and the game ends.
And that's it. It's a minimalistic story, but this is a time where I feel that less is more is just less.
The fantasy setting is really good. I'm really interested in the lore of this game. However, we don't get any of that. We're told the land is forbidden, and we're told that you can raise the dead there, but we're not told who Dorman is. We don't know the relationship between Wander and Mono. Are they a couple, brother and sister? What are they? We're not given a reason as to why Wander wants to resurrect her, so I don't see a reason to care about his ordeal because he's pretty much a block of wood. We get the idea that Dorman is an evil demon at the end of the game, but that's not really explained. We can assume that Dorman is an evil demon as his name is Nimrod spelled backwards, and King Nimrod was a biblical figure who was an evil king that was killed, cut into pieces, and scattered. But yet you could argue that Dorman was either a benevolent or passive deity that was split into 16 different pieces out of fear of his power.
If you love lore, this game has very little, so it's really up to your interpretation of events, so allow me to give you mine.
Dorman was a passive deity with the power to bring the dead back to life who resided in what is now known as the Forbidden Land. People probably brought their dead to Dorman to have them brought back to life. A group of people feared Dorman and thought his power was against the laws of nature and sealed Dorman into the 16 Colossi and forbade anyone from entering the land again. Years later, Mono was killed because she probably had a magic power that was feared, and is the girlfriend or sister of Wander who takes her to the Forbidden Land. Wander completes the Forbidden Ritual. Dorman is released, and while he's naturally passive, he's pissed at those who sealed him and their descendants. I say Dorman is a passive deity and not malevolent because he fulfills his end of the bargain. He revives Mono with no twists or anything. She isn't killed again shortly after. She's not in some twisted form or anything. A malevolent deity would do something like that to make the hero's efforts all in vain.
But now we have to go into, is this game art? Well, it depends on what your interpretation of art is.
I made a video about games being art, and in that video I said that games all have the same creative processes that go into making movies, music, and literature, and in my opinion, some games, movies, books, and whatever are art while others are not. Like the movie Hugo being a work of art due to its art style, deep and meaningful story and characters, and that a movie like Die Hard isn't as you go to watch it to see Bruce Willis beat the snot out of people and blow things up. But that's just based on opinion. Considering my standards for art, does Shadow of the Colossus make the cut? Well, 1. The art style is really good. The buildings look pretty creative, and the main stars of the game, the Colossi, are amazingly and creatively designed. And the game's art is really good at sucking you into the atmosphere. 2. The music is great. It helps immensely with immersion. 3. The programming is good once the Colossi are aware of you. They try to attack and will try to shake you off when you're on them, and fighting them is pretty epic. But for number 4, the story. It lacks the lore and character development that I crave from a fantasy setting.
So it meets 3 out of the 4 criteria for me to consider a game a work of art. If I was given more of a reason to care about Wander and his quest, yeah, then it would.
I'm not saying this game isn't a work of art, because as I said, art is what you think it is, so it's based on your opinion of what art is. If you think it is, then it is, but for me, I'm on the line about it. Because the art style and music are great, the game is pretty well crafted, and the battles are epic with the camera work making it look like a movie. The setting is awesome, but the character development just isn't there. It's like watching Star Wars on mute. You can see what's going on, but you won't get as to why because you can't hear their motives. I'd say it's still a game that you should play as the battles with the Colossi are amazing, but they are easy and you can finish the game in about 5 hours. Maybe 4 if you skip all the cutscenes, and 3 if you do everything perfectly. The Colossus I had the most fun with was the 5th one, and that's where I started to get really into the game. I'm glad that I gave this game a second chance, as my first impression from 8 years ago was an unfair one.
And when it comes down to giving it a rating, I'm gonna have to go with good. It's a solid title and it's worth a try, and you could pretty much finish it in one sitting.